the violence that occurred in the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, just a few months ago, should remind us that we can't take our democracy for granted. Around the world, we've seen once vibrant democracies go into reverse, locking in power for a small group of powerful autocrats and business interests, and locking out of the political process dissidents and protesters and opposition parties and the voices of ordinary people. It is happening in other places around the world, and these impulses have crept into the United States. We are not immune from some of these efforts to weaken our democracy.
Those words come as the fight over voting rights comes to a head in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer vowing to bring a sweeping voting rights bill to the floor for a vote. The bill, which the Democrats call the For the People Act, would create automatic voter registration and would expand access to early and absentee voting. It would also require states to overhaul their voter registration systems, limit states' ability to remove people from voter rolls, increase federal funds for election security, and reform the redistricting process. Democrats say it's life or death for democracy.
Democrats will bring forward legislation to protect voting rights and safeguard our democracy.
Our democracy is at stake.
We have to do something to fight back.
What we are trying to do is preserve democracy.
The hot rhetoric, though, doesn't add up to the cold, hard reality of votes. The math for Democrats right now does not add up. They need 60 votes to move ahead tomorrow, and they're not anywhere close. They don't have a single Republican, and the Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has yet to back it, although he has indicated he's hopeful that he can get there, but we'll see. Meanwhile, in the states, something that needs urgent attention right now is happening, to the former president's point. Local election workers and officials are feeling the brunt of standing up to Trump's big lie, right? For doing the right thing, for saying we've counted the votes, in many cases once and twice and three times, and here's who won. And that's fair, and that's right, and that's what happened. Just for doing that, they're getting death threats against themselves and their families.
Those lies have consequences, as we've seen around the country, as we've seen in Washington, D.C., as I've seen, outside my house. There are consequences to these lies.
A person said, enjoy your last birthday cake.
This is not acceptable. This is not acceptable behavior to threaten the wives, the children, the family of people that work for the government, or even the government workers.
Those individuals, along with local officials across the country, have been on the front lines, coming under attack for speaking the truth. It took a handful of brave officials in key swing states to say no to Donald Trump's lie in the crucial days following the November election. Those crucial heroes to stand up and say, we've counted the votes, and here is the winner. Just for that, they are the heroes who put America's democracy first and kept it intact. Many of these people who stood up to their own party, like Philadelphia's top election official, Al Schmidt, Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, Arizona's Attorney General Mark Brnovich, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and Georgia's elections manager Gabriel Sterling, along with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. And there are others. They may not be household names. Frankly, they don't want to be household names. Neither Baki Vu and Helen Butler. They're both local election officials in Georgia. And both are now losing their jobs at the end of the month and being replaced by pro-Trump Republicans. Vu drew the ire of his fellow Republicans for standing up to Georgia's voting law, which Trump and his allies backed. And Butler, a Democrat who's a vocal supporter of expanding voting rights, is also getting booted. Why? Well, it's because of the election law in Georgia that just happened. The Republican Governor Brian Kemp has signed a law which allows Republicans to appoint members to local election boards. Before the law passed, it was a bipartisan decision. I'm going to speak to Vu and Butler in just a moment. But first, Manu Raju is out front live on Capitol Hill. And Manu, there is almost no chance this federal voting bill goes anywhere. And obviously Chuck Schumer knows that, but going ahead with it anyway. Why?
They want to show that the Democrats are on the same page and make the argument, in their view, Democrats are for expanding access to voting, and their arguments that Republicans are trying to restrict access to voting, and they're trying to make that distinction very clear. And Republicans are arguing that this bill the Democrats are pushing would amount, Republicans say, is a federal takeover of the election system. But what's happening right now behind the scenes, Aaron, is a furious effort to try to get Joe Manchin on board, because the concern among Democrats is if they do lose that one key vote, it will lose that political argument going forward as they head into the midterm election season. So right now, Amy Klobuchar, who's the Senate Rules Committee chairwoman, is having discussions with Joe Manchin to try to get him on board. Manchin told me earlier this evening he has still not made a decision about whether he will vote to proceed to that legislation tomorrow, saying he wants to see whether the changes that he has proposed, including voter ID requirements, including expanding early access to voting, as well as other measures such as dealing with partisan gerrymandering, whether that gets included in the bill. Also to pare back significantly the Democrats' more sweeping proposal that he opposes. Now, Klobuchar told me as she was going in that they worked all through the weekend and they're planning to work into tonight to try to get an agreement just among Democrats. But Aaron, even though they will still, there's optimism among the Democrats that they could get their whole caucus in line, they still lack that 60 votes that are needed to overcome a Republican filibuster. There are not going to be any Republicans tomorrow to vote to move ahead, let alone 10, which they would need to overcome a filibuster. And Manchin has said repeatedly he will not change the filibuster rules, even on this issue, to move ahead. So it means, Aaron, almost certainly this is doomed until after next year's midterms.